Like Rosemary said, my name's James. I'm a staff developer in the operations department at Hootsuite. For those of you that have never heard about Hootsuite before, our mission statement is to champion the power of human connection. What that means right now is we are a social media management platform, and we are, I believe, the most widely used one currently, with over 16 million customers, I'm told. And we've got 1,000 employees across the planet. We're going to talk about 4 things. The first thing I'm going to talk about is nothing about deployment of Vault. And then we're going to time travel, if this works. And we're going to time travel to Hootsuite of the past, which was a scary place. And then we'll come back to the present, and we'll talk about how we use Vault for people and what we do at Hootsuite for Vault with our services. A lot of this stems from questions I've seen on the Google group, people chatting in Slack, questions I've had from people individually, and I'll post these slides up in the Slack group as PDFs when I'm done. So deployment, like I said, I'm not going to talk anything about deployment. That said, if you have not looked at Ansible playbooks or Terraform resources or anything else like that in the past 8 months or so, I really encourage you to do so. The documentation for deploying Vault is much better than it was a year ago, 2 years ago. And there's lots of good examples for Ansible playbooks, probably for Chef as well, that you can copy and paste and do your own deployments with. There's good information out there for hardening Vault and everything else like that. So with that said, we are going to travel back in time. We are traveling back in time as we speak. We are going back to a scary time for Hootsuite, a time before Vault. And here we are. As you can see, I was only a senior developer at the time, and we had a different logo. And so this time is kind of a mishmash of times. It's anywhere from a year to 2 years ago. It was a scary time for security. There's lots of scary things that I could show you. Fortunately, I can't actually show you any of these scary things with time travel because it would break the timeline. And so I just have a bulleted list. One thing we had, we're based on AWS, is we had separate accounts for all our developers that had static AWS keys. Yeah, that's scary, I know. We had unreliable coffee machines. Yep, also scary. We had our Ansible playbooks in Subversion, and that's a little bit older. But our Ansible playbooks, we had inside of it, we had SSH keys that were hard-coded for doing various forms of deployment. We had AWS keys that you could easily search for and use if that was your thing. We had database secrets that were also encoded in various playbooks. And all the deployment servers had public SSH keys, and really as a developer, when you'd start, you'd generate a key pair, you'd hand your public key to your coworker, and they would log in and put your key in, and that's how you would access more and more servers, and it became that's how things worked. It was really scary. We used various forms of encryption for all of these things. Really, most of it boiled down for Ansible Vault for Ansible, and there was just one password for Ansible Vault, and once you knew that password, you had access to everything. Also, at the time, apparently, we had no tea. There was just coffee. And so this is not good for a number of reasons. Number one, it's not good for caffeine. Number two, it's kind of a nightmare scary place. And because it's a nightmare scary place, I don't want to spend too much more time here. We're going to travel back to the present. That's better, okay. We're back to the present where everything is much nicer. So we started to look at Vault. And when we decided to look at Vault, we were like, we need to have a plan. We need to have a goal. And Vault, if you've never experienced it before, is a little bit mind-bendy. It's a little bit mind-twisty. And it can be hard for people to sort of understand how the dynamic has changed when it comes to Vault. And so we decided the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give people who are using Vault, we're going to put it right in their face so they have to use it every day and they get much more comfortable with it. So we came up with a goal. And that goal was that people come in the morning, they log into Vault, and they get a token that they can use all day long to do whatever they want to do. It's kind of an audacious goal when we were 2 years ago, but let's talk about how we made this happen. So the first thing is all of our technical staff are running Macs, and the onboarding documentation that we had told them, hey, by the way, welcome to Hootsuite. Please install Homebrew and follow this other guide. And this built on our onboarding process for developers. It built on having a common platform for imaging machines. And it made getting things onto laptops much easier. So one of the tools that we asked them to install was our own internal homebrew repository. And from there, we said, hey, well, there's a package called HS OpsKit, because it's Hootsuite and everything starts with HS. And OpsKit brought in a bunch of tools. It set up some configuration. It brought in some files. And the onboarding documentation would say, run these things. Don't worry if you don't understand why you're running them. Just run them. And one problem we ran into with this is developers would look at these instructions and be like, I don't think I need to run this. I'm going to write my own getting started guide in the wiki. And so for a while, developers would come on and be like, well, I know better than everybody else. I'm going to have my own getting started guide. And so one of the problems we had to eventually deal with was culling out people's getting started guides that weren't quite right. And you may run into this as well if you do something similar. When we initially did this, we didn't have this setup, the shell setup either. What shell setup winds up doing is it winds up adding some things into your bash RC or bash profile or ZSH RC file and add some functions that make them available in your shell. So when you do an installation of what we have as OpsKit, you get all of these tools. You get Vault, you get JQ, you get a bunch of Kubernetes things, you have the AWS command line, you get a reasonable version of sed that supports -i, and a bunch of other tools that are super handy to have when you're writing shell scripts or you're deploying little bits of code. So you know that every developer has these things installed for them. So I'm going to talk to you about two little other subcommands that were really handy. One was help. So help, all it did was it called open and opened up a wiki page. So as a person that has no idea what to do, you do opskit help, up it comes, and it brings you to a page that is always being updated, always has the latest information, and as people are struggling with whatever crazy problems they have, that's where they go and can find out what's going on. The other thing I mentioned earlier was the setup shell. This was a great way for us to wiggle into people's shells and get things added that we happen to want. So I've got a little code snippet here of what we basically did, but it's basically an idempotent way to add an extra shell script into your shell startup. One of the things that is now in people's paths is the Vault login function. This function wipes out your current Vault token and runs a setup script which takes care of 4 things. The first thing is it makes sure that you have the OSX keychain helper installed. It's a special version that we use that supports multiple environments, but instead of having a .tokens file sitting in your home directory, it puts everything in macOS keychain. It also makes sure that you are pointing to the right Vault address. At Hootsuite, we have 3 separate Vault environments, and I'll talk about that later. And then it makes sure that your current token is either valid or not valid, and if it's valid, it says, hey, you're already good to go. You have nothing to do. But if it's not valid, then it bootstraps in a Vault login for you using LDAP. Some things here that are kind of missing that are important to realize. Number 1 is that your user ID that we have for people's Macs happens to match the user ID that's in Active Directory. It's also the same user ID that we have for people's emails. So it makes automation so much simpler because you know that there's going to be matching all the way through. So people type Vault login. So there's a few things that happen behind the scenes. The first thing is that all the mapping for LDAP is done to policies, is done in Active Directory with Active Directory groups. The process for getting added to different Active Directory groups is documented in our wiki. Our IT department takes care of approval processes, making sure everything is fine. And they also take care of making sure that other people who are in that group are still supposed to be in that group over time. Whenever there's a group membership change, it goes to the audit log gets reviewed by the security department. So there's monitoring, there's auditing, there's recording of all of these changes. And as far as actually what membership you get inside Vault, it's a standard Vault policy mapping that you can find on the main wiki page. So here we are. You type Vault login. It reminds you that you need to MFA. You type in your password. We use Duo. You say yes for Duo, and bang, you're in. MFA was super important because we have a requirement that any authentication that happens is going to have multiple factor, and this makes sure that it happens. That said, this predates a lot of the OIDC work that's been going on. We're looking in the first half of next year to switch to OIDC for doing some of this. So there's two policies that are there. One is called vault operators, the other one's vault operators latch. This is actually two policies that I have on my vault token when I log in. The first one gives me access to special things. The second thing takes that access away. So basically, I am enhanced with superpowers, but then I have kryptonite and I can't use any of those superpowers. So we have another function that's embedded in your shell, and that's vault sudo. And vault sudo just makes another token, but it strips away all the policies except for, in this case, vault operators. And this gives me access to do the things that I need to do. It gives me a 1-hour token with these superpowers in one specific shell where I'm doing the things I need. And once I've done whatever it is I need to do, I can do vault shed, and I shed my token away. So I am now logged in, and I have a way of accessing things that I may not have been able to access before. Let's talk about things I can do with this token. The first thing I can do with this token is SSH. We have a tool called SSH client, and it does some pretty simple stuff. It creates a public-private key pair. It creates a unique one for each person. Initially, we were using people's existing key pairs, but we found that some people had them encrypted, some people had them passphrase protected, some people had them hardware passphrase and protected, some people had GPG going on. It was really tedious. So now we just dynamically create a key pair, and we ship the public key to a Lambda that we have. And this Lambda's job is singular in that it takes a look at who you are and will then sign your SSH key with whatever access you're supposed to have. Now, the SSH key signing is textbook SSH key signing. It's what you see in the Vault documentation for how to do this. The access request system is something we've built ourselves. It's built into Jira. It integrates with the rest of our tooling. And from there, you get a set of things that you are allowed to access. So one of the things that I just mentioned is that somehow this Lambda knows who I am. And so what we have is this Lambda has access to doing 3 specific things inside a Vault. The first is, of course, signing SSH keys. The second is looking up Vault tokens and then looking up entity information. And so we've crafted this sort of hacky, cool way of managing identity. So as a client, I create this Vault token, and I strip away all of the policies. I strip away everything. I don't even have the default policy. And it winds up becoming this basically identity token. And we wrap it, and then we ship that token to the server. Server's job is to unwrap it, looks up who I am, and pulls out from there my identity information. And so just like that, I'm able to leverage my Vault token as identity for accessing SSH. So really, what happens now is if you want to access SSH somewhere, you log into Vault. From there, you can use SSH client, and away you go. So that was SSH taken care of. Now, before I move on, I just want to say that in reality, we have a Bastion server sitting in the front there, and you need to go through Bastion, and everything that's there is logged and audited and everything else like that, and it's actually pretty cool. But anyway, that's SSH. AWS access. Similar to SSH, we have HSIM tool. HSIM tool is a Go-based tool that we've written. It's a really simple tool, but it leverages a lot of conventions that we've already put in place. It knows the host address for our Vault servers. It knows where to find various Vault credentials. It knows the paths inside Vault for accessing things. It knows what to do because everything has been set up already. It takes care of writing credentials that are fetched from Vault and writing them into your AWS credentials file. That's basically its main kind of purpose in life. We use STS assume role for fetching AWS credentials, which means that the creds you get back are good for about an hour, and then they expire and you need to get new credentials. Now, it has 4 main subcommands. It actually has 5, but we'll pretend it has 4. The docs one works similar to help, I was mentioning earlier. So if I run HSIM tool docs, it launches me into the wiki at a specific page. One thing that's worth noting here is that if you're going to do assume role like we did, there's no good way to revoke assume role tokens. They're good for the whole hour, and either you need to revoke everybody's tokens, or you just have to wait for the hour to expire. If you find that's not true, come and tell me, but I've talked to our AWS TAM, and they were like, yeah, this is fine. You should be able to revoke it. And then they were like, oh, no, you can't actually revoke it. So yeah, when you run this tool that we wrote, it's pretty simple. It just hits up Vault and fetches the credentials and writes them in your AWS credentials. Now, there's a few extra flags there. For example, I can say, hey, I want to access the read-only credentials, but I want that to be my default AWS profile. And so it'll fetch these keys, write them into your default credentials file, and just like that, you're able to do AWS from the command line. The sync is pretty handy because it keeps track of when that lease is going to expire. And so you can run that as much as you want. And before it expires, it's a no-op. And then when it's about 5 minutes, I think, from expiring, it'll go and fetch new credentials for you. So it became to a point where you can pass in now a Vault role and say, hey, I'm a shell script that does AWS. I need to access things. I'm going to call sync on whatever role I'm supposed to be using. And so now we have a standard way for people to access AWS with these short-lived credentials. It's been super handy, actually. Yeah. One other thing about this, as well, is we built in auto-completion. One of the things when it comes to security tools is usability is super important. Often usability and security fight each other because you want things to be secure, but you want them to be usable, but you don't want to tell people too much, but you want to tell them enough. But you want to be able to debug it, but debugging it would give away information. If you've ever tried to read a Vault log file and figure out what's going on from all the MD5 sums, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So once you have those AWS credentials, there you go. I can call AWS get caller ID. You can see that I have an LDAP login. It has my name in it. Now the user ID is unfortunately really long string. It's humorous when you're using the web console because that user ID shows up in the web console, especially if you're doing support tickets back and forth. That becomes your full name, which it tries to render but doesn't do a great job. It means that ops people can fetch temporary credentials, and just like SSH, it's managed through AD. And just like SSH, it has the same policies, the same procedures for getting added to new AD groups. Starting in Vault, I think 1.1 something, you can no longer take an existing token and enhance it with more policies. You actually have to log out and log back in again. So it means if you do get added or removed from different AD groups, you'll need to log out and log in again. Word of warning. Yeah, the IAM roles that are used here, they're all terraformed. They're all managed. There's instructions for our ops help department for if people want to create new groups or new roles to access, they can do it all without me, which is really good, because then I can come here. The last thing I want to talk about is how we bootstrap into the web console. So using your local credentials, we can actually use federation and bootstrap you into a web console. I'm not going to go into details. I have a link here, and like I said, I'll push these slides out as PDFs into Slack later. But this shows you how to do it with Python, and if you can read Python, you can translate it to any other language. But basically, you're able to use your local credentials and open up a web console from there. And again, just like that, your web console is good just for the hour that your original token's is good for. And if you need to refresh, you can refresh. We wound up adding a print flag to this instead of just booting you into the console, because what we found is some people actually like to use the console in Firefox, but they use Chrome for everything else, or some people use incognito mode for accessing AWS Web Console. They have their own special ways, and so this gives people a way of doing it themselves. Web will also do a sync. So we encourage developers, ops people, to write little one-liners that just wrap this, and so you can say like AWS read-only, you hit enter, and away you go, up comes a browser where you need to be. And your credentials are going to expire. It's super nice. Last thing I want to mention is list. List is what we use for autocomplete. All we do is we do a list of AWS roles in Vault. We get a huge list of them, and then we send them back to Vault. And we're like, hey, which of these can I actually use? And then Vault sends them back, and we show whatever list you're allowed to use. Like I said, it's for auto-completion. It's for debugging. It's for tracing how things are going. It makes it much, much more usable. So we use EKS for our Kubernetes clusters. And EKS is Amazon's Kubernetes offering, and it's based on IAM. And so, of course, we leverage HSIAM tool to get IAM credentials for accessing Kubernetes. So we've written a small wrapper around the original AWS IAM authenticator, and all it does is a sync. It syncs, it fetches some credentials that you're supposed to have, and then calls kubectl for you. So something like this says, I'm supposed to be the production admin, I am connecting to the production cluster. This is what you see in people's kube configs. We have another tool called hskubeconfig, which will actually spew all this out for you, and you don't have to worry about it. And then, as an end user, once I've logged into Vault in the morning, I have my Vault token. And when I run get pods, the first thing it will do is it'll go and do a sync of my AWS credentials, writes it out to the correct place, and then all of that gets wrapped with an AWS IAM authenticator, and away I go. So SSH, AWS, and Kubernetes, all now with short-lived tokens, all relatively easy, all with tooling, and makes our life a lot better. But not perfect. One of the issues that we've run into is, like I said, we have multiple Vault environments. And that's not something that a lot of people have, I'm learning, and it's really confusing for developers. As a developer, so something in Hootsuite is we have a dev, a staging, and a production environment. And so it makes sense that, when we're first setting up Vault, well, you want to have a dev, staging, and production Vault, right? Except that doesn't actually make sense in real life because really you don't need all those things. And as a developer, it gets super confusing because I want to interact with staging, so I would log into staging Vault. But you don't log into staging Vault, you log into production Vault. Oh, but if I need dev access to the dev Kubernetes cluster, then I should log into dev Vault. No, you log into production Vault. And so a lot of the tooling actually ignores things like Vault Adder and Vault Token and says basically, hey, I know best, trust me on this. And there's flags to override it to use environment variables. And it's been a little bit of a learning process for people. Another problem we ran into that I was surprised about was getting people to actually update the software that's on their laptops with Brew. Because we would push out fixes for HSIM tool, for the SSH client, for other tooling, and we tell everyone, hey, you should all update. It's got new features, it's got bug fixes, and of course, no one updates. And there's no real good way, well, there's ways, but there's no good way to enforce people to upgrade. And so we've been talking about different ways to let people know, to have the tooling check new versions and be like, hey, you're using an old version, I'm not going to run pretty soon, stuff like that. So one thing that we found is, even though we've asked people to upgrade, the first thing we ask people to do when they hop into the ops help channel is we say, like, hey, what version did you install? Oh, okay, well, you should install a new version. Interestingly enough, though, that doesn't always work. Because there are people who've decided, well, you know what? I don't trust opskit. I'm going to install my own version of Vault. I'm going to install my own version of kube control. Because no one should say kube cuddle. And so what winds up happening is you say, hey, what's the Brew version of the Kubernetes CLI? Oh, it's 1.12. something. Oh, that's great. But then why is it when I run kube control, it says 1.9? And so we've learned that basically some people have like curled it into their bin path and been like, hey, look, I know what's going on. And so you wind up with all these troubleshooting issues from people who are kind of doing weird things with updating. Another issue that we've run into is people access our servers through VPNs. And sometimes our security groups are set to work great from the office, but not so great from the VPN. So if you're doing something like this, make sure that you can hop on your VPN, make sure you can access everything from your VPN, make sure as you're fiddling with security groups that you test them out on your VPN if you are like us. Communication is huge. We had an old mechanism for accessing the web console that didn't work from the command line for AWS. And we wrote HSIM tool, we packaged it all up, and we're like, hey everyone, we have a way of doing this now that works with the command line, it works with the web, it's great. The tokens are short-lived, it's much more secure, and you get access to things that maybe you didn't have access to before. You should try it out. By the way, in like 2 or 3 months, we're gonna get rid of the old way. And we had 2 or 3 people that tried it. Hey, by the way, everyone, a month from now, we're gonna get rid of the old way. You should switch. And of course then, hey everyone, tomorrow we're getting rid of the old way. Yeah, everyone knows what happens. And when tomorrow comes by, we get rid of it, and everyone's like, what happened? Why did no one tell me? So, I don't know. To me personally, I would have shortened that window to be like 2 weeks and been like, hey, by the way, next Friday we're getting rid of this, so you better get on this. I think then people at least take it seriously. There was, of course, some pushback from people when we made the change to SSH and made the change to IAM tool. But one of the key things when we did this cutover is we kept people's access the same. We didn't actually restrict access to things. So it was just a different way of accessing things that they already were supposed to have resources to. Last thing I want to talk about is troubleshooting. So that's not bad. We use a tool called Twinery, which is a choose-your-own-adventure web-based tool. Anyone here ever used Twinery before? Yeah, I didn't think so. There's like one person that we just recently hired at Hootsuite that was like, dude, that's Twinery. I used to play a game that was like that, da da da, that's super cool. So like I said, Twiner is a choose your own adventure book, and we basically leveraged it for doing troubleshooting. You launch to a certain page, and you follow the guide, which is a troubleshooting guide, which says like, is your VPN up? Yes, no. Are you able to ping the server? Yes, no. Have you tried this? Yes, no. And somewhere there's a GRU that eats you if you go the wrong way. And we work through like, have you installed the right versions? Have you done all the right tooling, et cetera, et cetera. It's definitely helped us because we can basically point people at this troubleshooting guide, and if they don't come back, that's a good thing. Unlike an adventure, I guess. Anyway, the one that's here we use for how you actually use Vault inside your services. We initially had this huge wiki page that was like, so you're on Kubernetes and you want to get AWS tokens? Well, here's how you do this. Oh, you've got an EC2 server and you want to access your database credentials. Oh, and it was just this huge wall of text. And I don't know about you, but like whenever I see a huge wall of text, I scroll through it and I'm kind of like, Stack Overflow maybe? And so we turned this huge wall of text into, what are you? Are you a Jenkins job? Are you trying to SSH somewhere? What is it you're trying to do? Here's what you actually need to do. Here's how you copy and paste things and put things together. So with service accounts, we had some similar goals to people. For services, we want a really low barrier of entry. We decided if you can read a file, you can use Vault. We wanted to be language agnostic. Didn't matter if you were writing in Go, if you're writing in Ruby, Python, Scala, whatever. We want it to work across all languages. We want it to work in our EC2 instances. We want it to work for our Kubernetes. We have CI jobs that also need to access resources, so we wanted them to be able to do it as well. Also, we wanted our devs to be able to access these things. And we wanted to leverage all the existing infrastructure that we put up so everything just flowed if it needed to. So leveraging convention over configuration, we wrote a tool called the Vault Control Tool. It takes care of 4 steps. Number 1, it takes care of authentication. If you're on Kubernetes, it uses your service account. If you're on EC2, it uses your AMI, EC2 metadata to authenticate. And it'll also take care of authenticating you with a hard-coded token, if that's your thing. It'll fetch secrets on your behalf and write them out to files. And it'll manage any leases that you have ongoing. So your AWS leases, it'll keep them fresh. Your SSH keys keeps them fresh. If you're doing PKI, it'll rotate your certificates periodically. And when you kill off Vault Control tool, it does its best to try to revoke all of your leases and revoke your token and get rid of everything for you to try to keep everything as secure as possible. So this actually predates the Vault Agent work that's been going on. And we're hoping to sort of nudge Vault Agent in the direction that we want so we can get rid of this and just use Vault Agent. So like I said, it has 3 main modes for doing authentication. The hard-coded mode that we have, so passing in a Vault token into this tool, is good for developers on laptops. So this is where you wind up using the dev mode, the dev environment for Vault. You use your token that you have, you can leverage that to get into Dev Vault, and then you can use secrets there. Our Dev Vault environment, developers have a lot more access. They can do things that they probably should never do. And luckily for us, they don't actually do too much on there other than write secrets. But they're able to read secrets that they weren't otherwise able to read. Another thing about this is a Go binary. It takes care of all the heavy lifting. There's no other thing you need installed. You don't need Vault installed. You don't need JQ installed. And because it's Go, we push the binary up into our Artifactory server, and we can pull it down through Brew for Macs, and then we pull it down through curl for other environments. I'm going to say, when it comes to Kubernetes, we made one little mistake that we're currently running into, and so if you are doing service account authentication and you're naming your roles inside Vault, one thing you're probably doing is like, what do we name our role? Well, my service is called foo, so I'm going to call the role itself, I'm going to call it foo as well. So we did that, and if you were going to do that, I would say you should put the namespace in the role name. So don't call it just foo, call it like default-foo or whatever it is, kube system foo, whatever you've got going on. It'll make your life a lot better. People have started to make other namespaces with similarly named services because it's a testing namespace, and now they can't really define different credentials without becoming much more messy. So the Vault Control tool reads in a YAML file because it's YAML. And from there, you can fetch AWS credentials, you can fetch SSH certificates, it can actually template through using Go templates an existing config file. So if you were previously taking from an Ansible playbook and you had all your secrets in Ansible, you can pull them out, put in a Go template, and use the Vault control tool to sub in the secrets that you normally kept in Ansible, and they're static secrets, you just keep them inside of Vault instead. And if you are the kind of tool that is Vault aware, maybe you're using the transit backend, maybe you are using things that are not easily readily available otherwise, you can actually just pull out the token and do Vault yourself. One of the interesting things we've done is our Jenkins jobs all authenticate against Vault as well. And so we have 2 Jenkins servers. We have one that's currently running on Mesos, and we have a new one that's running on Kubernetes. Now in Kubernetes, Jenkins uses its service account to authenticate to Vault. And the jobs themselves can bootstrap from using the token that's available to authenticate themselves as an individual job. So from there, you can have jobs that access SSH keys to go certain places for their deployment, or AWS keys to move things into S3 buckets, whatever it is you happen to need. The identity system is hokey, by which I mean basically as a job, I just say, hey, you know what? I am this job, so trust me when I tell you I'm this job. There's no enforcement of identity right now, but by breaking this down and having the individual using Vault stanzas there, we're able to leverage existing infrastructure for fetching secrets. Hopefully in the future we'll do better identity management, but for now we have this in place. The last part, of course, was leases and termination. So in Kubernetes, you have a sidecar running because who doesn't have a sidecar running? And this takes care of keeping your anything that needs to be refreshed fresh. And on EC2 servers, we have a cron job running. And also on EC2 servers, when you shut down, we have, I feel like systemd, we have like after final target one-shot exec of just tearing everything down. So whenever you have a great tool that does everything, you're like, well, when don't I use this tool? And so what we've told people is if you are an EC2 server and all you need are AWS resources and you can do IAM and you can do this all by yourself, then don't use Vault control tool, just go direct. Similarly, if you are a Kubernetes service and all you need are Kubernetes secrets, just go direct as well. We have a bit of a question mark when it comes to ACM because certificate management is sort of like messy. Where do ACM won't release private keys. Vault, you don't want to put your private key anywhere, so you have to choose where that's coming from. But basically, the rule of thumb we've come up with is if you can go native, go native. Otherwise, do Vault control tool. So, Hootsuite of today. Hootsuite of today, we have Vault login for people. Developers are using short-lived AWS credentials. They use the same credentials for the command line and the web. We have multiple redundant coffee machines on multiple floors. I've never gone without coffee. We have dynamic short-lived SSH keys for people that are going places and SSHing into different servers. Similarly, and I didn't talk about this because I only have so much time, we have database credentials that are automatically created for people that need to go into database servers. For services, we did a huge sweep. And we had to get rid of SSH public keys. We had to get rid of AWS keys that were everywhere. We have a bot called Chaos Bot that if a key isn't used in 90 days, we go and just delete your key. We've cleaned up a lot of things, and we have 8 flavors of tea. So in summary, like one of the previous talks I went to, incremental improvements are key. Slow, incremental improvements to get where you're going. Tooling is also super important. Make it easier for people to do the things that they need to do. And lastly, going back in time can be super scary. So I would be remiss, of course, to not mention that we're hiring. And if working at a place like this seems interesting to you, that can make these kind of changes in probably about 18 months, then come talk to me. Anyway, thank you.